Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive investigation to unpack one of the most misunderstood economic paradoxes in the world. We're looking at the 500-year wealth trap. We're asking the really tough question: why don't Africans, both on the continent and in the diaspora, build scalable wealth together? Now, right out of the gate, I want to introduce our core thesis. This is absolutely not a failure of culture. Not at all. Instead, as you're going to see, specific historical and economic systems systematically made cooperation way too risky. And the wildest part? Those systems actually followed African people from the continent directly into the diaspora.
Okay, let's kick things off with a pretty shocking visual. On the left side of your screen, we have Filipino immigrants. On the right, African immigrants. Now, both of these groups are highly educated, and they're living in the exact same Western cities, places like Toronto or London. But when you look at the data, the contrast is just staggering. South Asian and Filipino communities maintain co-residence rates above 80%. They deliberately live together, they pool their income, and they build massive collective equity. But on the right, despite being among the most highly educated immigrant groups out there, African professionals often live independently, with their net collective investments hovering near zero. So are we just looking at a series of bad choices, or were systems explicitly engineered to ensure this exact outcome?
Let's jump into Section 1, the wealth cooperation paradox. To really wrap our heads around this data, we need to zoom out a bit, because this isn't just a diaspora problem happening in Western cities. If you look at booming cities right on the continent, like Lagos, Nairobi, or Kinshasa, large-scale cooperation between strangers is a massive structural deficit there too. It's a structural problem that travels. And look at the sheer scale of the capital on this bar chart. That huge red bar? Over $100 billion in remittances is leaving the African diaspora every single year. I mean, that rivals the $97 billion in total foreign direct investment going into the entire continent. But look at that tiny little sliver at the end. Collective diaspora investment is practically zero. The money is absolutely there, the ambition is there, but that capital is flowing almost exclusively towards survival, completely bypassing the compounding wealth vehicles that other communities rely on.
Which brings us to Section 2, Engineered Autonomy and Trust.
To actually solve this mystery, we have to rewind centuries, long before colonialism, to uncover the deep structural roots of this paradox. Watch how this cycle works on the screen. This is a brilliant political technology historians call the Luba mechanism. A community grows, friction emerges, and then, instead of building some massive top-down bureaucracy to keep everyone in line, the group deliberately splits. A completely new autonomous unit forms just a few miles away. This organic, cell division style of growth was a perfectly engineered system. It maintained peace across vast territories by prioritizing autonomy over centralization. But, and here's the catch, when that ancient operating system of, hey, let's just split when things get complicated, runs inside a modern corporate economy, it completely misfires.
And check out this side-by-side continental map from the year 1880. It's wild. On the left, Africa had an estimated 45,000 independent political units. On the right, Europe had fewer than 500. You really have to understand, this is not a sign of underdevelopment. Not at all. It reveals a completely different political civilization, one built from the ground up on engineered autonomy. This quote right here really anchors everything we're talking about. In 2025, Nobel laureates James Robinson and Soren Hen published landmark findings explaining that centralization was structurally and ecologically resisted. African societies weren't somehow incapable of building massive states, they actively organized themselves to safeguard internal autonomy. Avoiding massive, centralized empires was a very deliberate ecological and structural choice. But beneath that ancient political architecture came a force that utterly shattered the social fabric. As economist Nathan Nunn's landmark data reveals, the Atlantic slave trade wasn't just the export of bodies. It was a 4th-century incentive structure that systematically destroyed community trust. European traders offered goods, local actors supplied captives, and almost overnight, the person living literally right next door to you became a lethal threat. Trust totally collapsed at the community level. In that kind of environment, only your immediate family remains safe. And that brings us to this massive pattern interrupt. Think about this. On one hand, you have a failed group investment meeting. Empty chairs, $0 pulled. But on the other hand, an instant international funeral wire transfer, where $10,000 is raised via WhatsApp group in just 48 hours. Same people, same week. So cooperation isn't missing at all. It's simply locked inside this incredibly tight radius of bonding trust for emergencies. But bridging trust, the kind you absolutely need to do business with strangers, was broken centuries ago, and it largely remains broken today.
All right, Section 3, Colonialism and Economic Traps. Now we're going to look at how colonial borders and modern economic models took this deep-seated distrust and basically locked it into permanent failing institutions. Look at how this played out historically. During the 1884 Berlin Conference, European hands drew fast, straight lines across the map, arbitrarily splitting existing ethnic trade networks, like the Iwe or Somali people, right down the middle. But they didn't just fragment the land. They actively cultivated intergroup suspicion through divide-and-rule tactics, giving one group authority over another and then rotating it. They literally institutionalized distrust as a governance tool, leaving behind weak post-independence institutions where, quite rationally, only your immediate family can be trusted.
Which steps us right into the famous Dutch disease economic loop diagram, adding this massive economic layer to the trap. Oil or minerals get discovered, foreign currency floods in, the local currency artificially appreciates, and suddenly, cheap imports flood the market. Domestic manufacturing completely collapses. Now, why does a lack of factories matter for trust? Because manufacturing supply chains are literally cooperation classrooms. When 50 domestic suppliers have to rely on each other every day to build a product, they learn cooperative business skills. Without manufacturing, those cooperative networks just disappear.
Let's move to Section 4, the Modern Diaspora Tax. So let's bring all these historical and economic forces into the present day, because we need to understand the immense burden placed on modern African professionals living abroad right now. We call it the diaspora tax. Check out this split screen showing the income flows. On the left, a Filipino immigrant's income flow allows for moderate remittances, leaving a really meaningful local savings pool. On the right, the African immigrant faces a massive remittance obligation. Every single month, money is going to a mother in Lagos, an uncle's hospital bill, a cousin's tuition. It is a highly rational, one-person welfare system compensating for weak states back home. But man, it completely drains the exact capital needed to build collective equity and local wealth.
This leads us to Section 5, building institutional trust.
So how do we actually fix this? Because good news, it is entirely fixable. We need to look at how other communities around the world successfully built scale and institutional trust from the ground up. Take a look at this illustration of Myatsfields Park in South London. Local residents spent roughly 20 years organizing, fundraising, and pooling money to restore this park. They had zero guaranteed personal financial return. None. They just trusted the collective goal. This is proof that institutional trust, cooperating for a shared goal without an immediate personal payout, isn't some innate genetic trait. It is a learned, actionable skill.
Now, look at this generational timeline graphic. This context is absolutely critical. Look at the runway other groups had. Chinese immigration to North America began in the 1840s, Punjabi immigration in the 1900s. Jewish diaspora networks are literally centuries old. But the African mass diaspora, that largely began in the 1990s. They are roughly at year 30. So it looks like effortless community wealth in other groups is actually 4 to 6 generations of deliberate network building. The African diaspora is early, you guys. They are not behind.
And we can see exactly how this builds. We already have the cooperative impulse. It exists right now in informal community savings circles, known as a Sousou or Tontine. We don't need to invent the desire to cooperate. It just desperately needs that missing layer of legal formalization to actually scale up. You go from an informal tontine to legal registration to a shared bank account to a formal investment club, and finally, all the way up to a generational wealth syndicate. Structure is the missing link.
Section 6. Verdict. Structure, not culture. So here's the ultimate verdict of our explainer, and honestly, I find it incredibly empowering. The cooperation gap is the compounding result of these 6 very specific structural forces. From ancient anti-centralization designs and the devastating trust destruction of the slave trade, all the way to colonial borders, weak institutions, Dutch disease, and the modern diaspora tax. Let me be perfectly clear, this is a structural deficit. It is absolutely not a cultural defect. And because it's structural, that means it can be dismantled.
Take a look at this trust pyramid animation. This shows exactly what the upcoming, highly educated second generation must build to bridge the gap and scale wealth. Bonding trust at the family level? Incredibly strong. Bridging trust in the community? Currently weak. But linking trust, that institutional layer right at the top, is missing entirely. That is the exact assignment for the generation coming of age right now, leveraging new digital tools and legal frameworks.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Reversing a 500-year structural trap doesn't require magic. It simply begins with the conscious choice to institutionalize trust today. Just like all the communities that successfully built scalable wealth before them, they started with the decision to stop acting alone.